So today's service, Terry and I have titled Hope and Pride. But of course, the reality is that many of us have come this morning carrying, to one degree or another, grief, fear, anger, dismay, exhaustion. The list goes on. And Pride Weekend arrives this year, of course, amid renewed attacks on the LGBTQ plus community and people, especially, as Dr. Terry said, transgender people, and a wider, ever increasing climate of polarization, not just in the United States, but as you can see, around the world. And it would be dishonest of me to share today's sermon without acknowledging this fact. And just a few statistics before I carry on with the main sermon and the main message. In today's United States, LGBTQ plus people are 5 times more likely to be victims of violent crime. More than 1/3 of LGBTQ plus Americans face some form of discrimination. And that figure rises to a staggering 60% amongst transgender Americans, North Americans. Over 40% of the homeless youth in the US today identify as LGBTQ+, and between 40 and 70%, depending on when the readings are taken, queer people report symptoms of varying degrees of depression. These statistics are true and staggering. And according to the Human Rights Commission, more than 60, that's 60 member nations of the United Nations still criminalize consensual same-sex relations. And in several of these perceived offenses, they are punishable by death. I do not want to mention the statistics of violence and murder against queer people here in South Africa because they are disturbing, to say the least, which is particularly devastating when written into the very constitution of South Africa that was drawn up after it became a free and democratic nation in 1994, with, of course, Nelson Mandela as its first democratically elected president. Inside that constitution, equal rights for queer people, including the right to marry. Imagine a constitution with that in. Original constitution. So I guess you could ask, well, then why, given all of these facts and statistics, did Terry and I decide to call the service Hope and Pride? Well, as you heard from Nick Payton's song honoring Muksin Hendricks, he chooses hope as its refrain. And I think the key is to distinguish hope from optimism. Optimism says, well, things may get better or probably will get better if you're a very optimistic person. But hope says, we will keep choosing love and justice, whether or not the outcome is guaranteed. And that distinction resonates deeply, of course, with our Unitarian Universalist thinking, because it places hope into our values and our actions rather than into predictions about politics. So hope is not the denial of reality and the realities that I mentioned earlier. Hope begins by looking reality squarely in the face. And let us not forget that Pride, as it's known today, both nationally and internationally, did not begin as a parade. It actually began as a refusal. It was the refusal to believe that shame should have the final word. Now, as many of you know, in the 1950s and 1960s in the United States, LGBTQ plus people faced widespread legal and social discrimination. Homosexual acts, as they were known, were illegal, and gay bars were often the only safe space that they could have for socializing, even though, of course, they were regularly targeted by police raids. The Stonewall Inn, I'm sure most of you know it, but for those of you tuning in who don't, it's situated in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, New York City, and it was a popular bar for marginalized members of the queer community, including drag queens and transgender people. In the early hours of June 28th, 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, arresting employees and patrons under laws that they said prohibited unlicensed alcohol sales and enforcing, if you can believe, gender-based dress codes. Unlike previous raids, the crowd outside did not disperse. And in fact, a very good friend of mine, Michael, who I've spent many years with in his home on Fire Island, always said very proudly that he was sitting at the same bar in Stonewall when he said the drag queen picked up her very high heel shoe and threw it at a cop. Of course, this signaled the moment when both patrons and neighborhood residents began to resist. They were jeering, they were throwing objects, and eventually set the bar on fire. The confrontation escalated, as you know, as many of you know, over 6 days with repeated clashes between police and protesters. So the Stonewall Uprising is widely recognized as the catalyst for the modern LGBTQ plus rights movement in the USA, but also internationally. It inspired the formation of activist organizations, and it led to the first ever gay pride march on the anniversary of the riots, which, of course, is today, June 28th. And June, as we know, later on was designated as Pride Month to commemorate the events and the ongoing struggle for equality. So, if pride is the opposite of shame, then what is hope the opposite of? Well, I don't think it's despair. I believe hope is the opposite of resignation. Resignation says, nothing I do matters. But hope says, my actions matter, even when I cannot control the outcome. What do others say hope is? Well, of course, if you Googled, there would be a plethora of quotes, but I wanted to share two of my favorite because I think they speak very deeply and succinctly to this whole theme of today. Rebecca Solnit, if you don't know her, I highly recommend you investigate her and her writings. She's a prolific writer, she's a historian, and of course an activist, known for her very influential works on feminism. I'm sure, Arlene, you know of her very well. Feminism, social change, and environmental issues as well, and culture. And she said this: hope is an embrace of the unknown. Someone also very dear to me because of the 2 years that I spent living and working in Prague in the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. Now, as you know, he was a Czech activist and later became, very much like Nelson Mandela, the first president of the Czech Republic after the fall of the Soviet Union. After, of course, many years languishing in jail, might I add, but a deep thinker, an amazing writer, and his political inspirations were groundbreaking. And he said this: hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing regardless of how it turns out. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't gather week in and week out because history guarantees progress. History doesn't, we know that. Rights, as we have seen through the course of our lives, can be won and then lost. Justice can advance and then, as we have seen all too painfully, retreat. But we gather as a community, we gather with what we believe to be true, because every human being possesses inherent worth and dignity. And that truth does not depend upon election cycles, court decisions, or public opinion. So at the end of the day, what can we say? Well, I think we can say, and as Terry said so beautifully, hope is a discipline of telling the truth, a discipline of refusing to dehumanize, a discipline of protecting those who are vulnerable, a discipline of celebrating joy as an act of resistance. And I know we've talked about this before. Dear Lorraine has spoken to us as a community about this before. Joy as an act of resistance. And it's also a discipline of showing up again and again and again, starting with today and following into tomorrow. I once heard it said, and I hope these words land with you because they're so beautiful. The arc of the moral universe does not bend because we admire it. It bends because ordinary people keep placing their hands upon it. So this Pride weekend, may we choose hope, not because justice is inevitable, but because justice is worthy. And may we choose pride, not because prejudice has disappeared, but because love refuses to hide, which is why I wanted to share Muhsin's story with you today. And may we leave this place today, whether it's from the comfort of our own home as we Zoom in together, or from the Bristol. And may we leave determined that someone who is afraid today will somehow, through people like us, know and feel that they're not alone, and also know and feel that they belong. I wanted to just share the chalice candle with you because, as we know, a candle does not eliminate darkness. It simply refuses to cooperate with it. And hope is not pretending that darkness isn't there. hope is deciding to be the light. So may I end today's sermon with this blessing. May we all have the courage to continue to tell the truth. May we have the compassion to stand with all of those on the margins of our society who are hurting. And may we have the imagination to believe that another world is possible. And may our hope be measured not by what we expect to happen, but by the love that we choose to practice every day. Blessed be, thank you, and happy Pride weekend.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.